Hey everyone, and welcome back. A lot of you have been asking about this, and we're finally going to tackle it. Psychopaths versus sociopaths.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you hear these terms thrown around all the time, right? But do we actually know what they
Right.
mean? I know I was a little fuzzy on the details. So luckily, someone sent us this really cool YouTube video
Yeah.
called Wellness Lenses, and they also had this ebook that went along with it, and
Awesome.
it really breaks the whole thing down. So we're going to use that to sort of guide our deep dive today. What do you think?
I think that sounds great. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. So the video starts out by laying some groundwork, right? It's saying that psychopathy and sociopathy actually both fall under this bigger umbrella,
Okay.
which is called antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD.
Right. And the ebook actually does a really good job of explaining what ASPD entails. It's essentially a persistent pattern of disregarding other people's rights.
Okay.
And so this could manifest as deceitfulness, manipulation, impulsivity, disregard for safety.
So not exactly someone you want to be living next door to?
Probably not, but it is important to note that, ASPD is a spectrum.
Okay.
Not everybody who's diagnosed with ASPD is going to be like a violent criminal, which is a common misconception.
Right.
And so the ebook uses this great analogy. They say, think of mammals.
Okay.
You've got lions and you've got house cats. They're both mammals,
Right.
but they have very different temperaments and behaviors.
Okay, I like that. So ASPD is the mammal,
Yes.
and psychopathy and sociopathy would be like the lion and the house cat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Different expressions of the same broader category.
I love it. Okay, so that leads perfectly into my next question. What makes a psychopath different from a sociopath?
So that's where it gets really interesting. The video explains that one of the key distinctions is in their origins. So psychopathy is often considered to have a stronger genetic basis.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a predisposition, like a blueprint that might make someone more likely to develop those traits.
Wait, are you saying there's a psychopath gene?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but research does suggest that there's a strong hereditary component.
Okay.
And the ebook actually dives into some of these studies and shows that specific genes that are linked to things like emotional processing and impulse control can actually be different in people with psychopathic traits.
So they're kind of wired differently from birth.
In a way, yes, and those genetic differences can manifest in some pretty striking ways. The video kind of highlights some of the behavioral hallmarks of psychopathy.
Okay.
A profound lack of empathy, superficial charm, a tendency towards manipulation, and this chilling ability to mimic emotions that they don't actually feel.
Oh, that's giving me chills.
I know, it is a bit unsettling, is it? And this is where the brain research gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
You know that area of the brain called the amygdala?
Vaguely. I know it has to do with emotions.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like our brain's emotional control center, especially for things like fear and empathy.
Okay.
And studies have shown that psychopaths actually tend to have a smaller and less active amygdala compared to the general population.
So that could explain why they don't seem to experience fear or remorse the same way that we do?
Exactly. And it goes beyond the amygdala. Psychopaths also tend to have differences in their prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for things like planning, decision-making, and impulse control.
So their brains are set up to make them less inhibited and more likely to engage in risky behavior?
Yeah, you could definitely say that. Now with sociopathy, the picture's a little bit different.
Okay.
While genetics might play some role, the video really emphasizes the influence of environmental factors, especially early childhood experiences.
Like trauma, abuse, neglect, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. All of those adverse events. And the ebook actually points out that those early traumas can have a real impact on brain development, particularly in areas like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
So while someone might not be born with a predisposition for sociopathy, those early experiences can actually alter their brain chemistry and make them more susceptible to developing those traits.
So it's like nature loads the gun and nurture pulls the trigger.
Ooh, that's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
But it highlights how crucial early intervention and support can be in preventing these personality disorders from developing.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about all the brain stuff, but how does this actually play out in real life? How can you tell if someone is showing psychopathic versus sociopathic traits?
Right. That's where it gets a little bit trickier, but the video does provide some helpful clues.
Okay.
With psychopath, one of the most striking signs is this disconnect between their outward charm and their inner world.
Okay.
So they can be incredibly charismatic and persuasive, but that charm is often superficial.
Okay.
It masks this deep lack of empathy and remorse.
So they're wearing a mask.
Exactly. And they're often very good at manipulating people to get what they want.
Okay.
And they'll use their charm and their intelligence to exploit others without a second thought.
It's scary. And what about sociopaths? How do they tend to behave?
Well, remember how we talked about their impulsivity and the role of those environmental factors?
Yeah.
That tends to manifest in their behavior as well.
Okay.
Sociopaths are often more erratic and unpredictable.
Okay.
They're prone to emotional outbursts and risky actions.
Okay.
They might struggle to maintain relationships, have a history of conflicts with authority, and generally demonstrate a disregard for rules and social norms.
So, well, like a psychopath might meticulously plan a sociopath might just like lash out in a moment of anger without thinking of the consequences.
That's a really good way to visualize it. And the video actually gives us a great example to illustrate this.
Okay.
They say, imagine two people committing financial fraud.
Okay.
The psychopath might spend months crafting this elaborate scheme, carefully covering their tracks and feeling absolutely zero remorse for their victims. But the sociopath, on the other hand, might just act on impulse, embezzling money in a moment of desperation, and later feeling some regret, but it might be more about getting caught than the actual harm they caused.
Wow, so like two totally different approaches to the same crime.
Exactly.
That's crazy. But okay, how do you tell if someone's actually a psychopath or a sociopath? Can you spot them just by talking to them?
Well, this is where we have to tread carefully, because remember, we are not qualified to diagnose anybody.
Of course.
But the video does offer some red flags that can help you recognize potentially problematic personality traits.
Okay.
Whether it's in a personal relationship or a professional setting.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone wants to know.
Right.
Like how to protect yourself. So should we get into that?
Let's do it. So we were talking about those red flags, right? Things to look out for.
Yeah, like how do you know if someone's maybe not who they seem to be?
Yeah, exactly. So the video does a good job of giving us some practical advice here.
Okay, good.
And it all starts with trusting your instincts.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you know that feeling you get when something just seems a little off about someone?
Yeah.
Even if you can't quite explain it?
Right.
That's your intuition, and it's actually often surprisingly accurate.
So you're saying like if your gut's telling you to be wary of someone, don't ignore it.
Exactly, yeah. Better safe than sorry, right.
Right.
But the video also breaks down some specific red flags to look out for.
Okay, let's hear it.
So let's start with those psychopathic traits.
Okay.
Remember we talked about that mask, that superficial charm, hiding that lack of empathy? That's a big one.
Okay.
If someone seems too good to be true, they probably are.
So if they're like super charming and charismatic and everyone loves them,
Yeah.
that could be a warning sign.
It's definitely something to pay attention to. And it's not just about charm, though.
Okay.
The video also highlights other psychopathic traits like a grandiose sense of self-worth,
Okay.
pathological lying, a constant need for stimulation or excitement, and often they might have a history of risky or impulsive behavior, and they don't really care about the consequences.
So they're like always pushing the boundaries, living life on the edge kind of thing.
Yeah, you could say that it's definitely a red flag.
Okay.
And then here's a big one, lack of remorse or guilt.
Oh, okay.
Psychopaths, they tend to have a very difficult time understanding or experiencing those emotions.
Okay.
They might hurt others without a second thought and show no signs of regret or empathy for their victims.
That's pretty chilling.
Yeah, it is a little bit unsettling. So what about sociopaths?
Yeah, what are the red flags there?
Well, remember how we talked about their impulsivity and that tendency toward emotional outbursts?
Right.
Those are big ones.
Okay.
They often struggle to control their emotions.
Okay.
And so they might react in really extreme or unpredictable ways.
So they might like fly off the handle easily or get into trouble a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And another important red flag is blame shifting.
Okay.
They have a really hard time taking responsibility for their actions. So they'll often blame others for their problems or mistakes.
So it's never their fault.
Right, exactly. Now, it's really important to remember, though, that these are just red flags.
Right.
They're not diagnostic criteria.
Of course.
Not everyone who displays these traits has a personality disorder.
Right.
Only a qualified professional can make that determination.
Yeah, for sure.
But these signs can at least help you assess. You know, is this someone who might be exhibiting some potentially problematic behavior?
Exactly.
And that awareness can be incredibly valuable for protecting yourself.
For sure. Okay, so let's say you've noticed some of these red flags in someone you know.
Okay.
What do you do? What are some practical strategies for actually dealing with that?
Well, that's where the ebook comes in handy.
Okay.
It gives us this whole toolkit of strategies for navigating these tricky situations.
I like it.
One of the most important things, and the video emphasizes this too, is setting boundaries.
Okay.
You need to clearly define what behavior you're willing to accept and what you're absolutely not going to tolerate. And then you have to communicate those boundaries assertively.
So like stand your ground, basically.
Yeah. Because, you know, people with these antisocial traits, they often test boundaries.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to see how much they can get away with. So the clearer and firmer your boundaries are, the less likely they are to try to exploit you.
Makes sense. What if they push those boundaries, though?
Well, then that's where the next strategy comes in, limiting contact.
Okay.
If you want to reduce your interactions with this person as much as possible. So this might mean physical distance, limiting communication,
Okay.
or even cutting off contact altogether if necessary.
I imagine that's easier said than done, especially if it's someone like you work with or you see regularly.
Yeah, you're right. It can be very challenging. But even small steps can help.
Okay.
Like avoiding one-on-one interactions,
Uh-huh.
refusing to engage in gossip or drama.
Right.
That can help protect your emotional energy. And if the situation is just becoming unbearable, you might want to consider something more drastic, like transferring departments or even seeking a new job.
And I imagine that goes for relationships too.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
if you're dating someone who's showing these traits, it can be really hard to get out of that.
Yeah, and the ebook's really sensitive to that. It emphasizes, leaving an abusive relationship is never easy.
Of course.
It often involves a lot of complex emotions and practical challenges.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to prioritize your own safety and well-being.
For sure.
And, reaching out to trusted friends, family members, or even a therapist can provide some invaluable support during that process.
Absolutely. It's so important to remember you're not alone.
Exactly. And along those lines, another really practical strategy that the ebook highlights is documentation.
Documentation.
Yeah. So if you're dealing with someone who's constantly lying, manipulating, or engaging in, harmful behavior, it's really important to keep a record of those incidents.
So like keeping a diary of their bad behavior.
It could be as simple as that, or it could be more formal documentation like emails, text messages,
Okay.
maybe even voice recordings if you feel comfortable.
So it's like gathering evidence in case things escalate.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about protecting yourself and having a clear record of what's been happening.
Right.
And speaking of protection, the ebook also emphasizes the importance of not trying to fix someone with these traits.
Also, like, don't play therapist.
Right. As tempting as it might be to try to help or change them,
Yeah.
it's often just a futile effort.
Okay.
People with antisocial personality disorder, they rarely seek help on their own.
Uh-huh.
And even when they do traditional therapies, often prove to be ineffective.
So what do you do? Like leave them to their own devices?
Well, it's not about abandoning them,
Okay.
but it's more about recognizing your own limitations and focusing on protecting yourself.
Right.
You can't force someone to change if they don't want to.
That's a tough one. But what about like situations where you can't just walk away? So like say you're in a workplace and your boss or a colleague is exhibiting some of these traits.
Yeah, that's where things get even trickier.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. The video doesn't really get into this aspect too much, but the ebook does provide some helpful insights.
Okay, good.
For example, it emphasizes the importance of understanding the dynamics of power
Uh-huh.
and how they can be exploited by individuals with antisocial traits.
So like if you have a boss who's really manipulative or controlling, you need to be extra aware of that.
Exactly. And it also highlights the importance of networking and building alliances
Okay.
with colleagues who can offer support.
Oh, so like having a support system at work.
Exactly. And if the situation becomes unbearable, remember you always have the option of reporting the person to HR or seeking legal counsel.
Right.
You don't have to suffer in silence.
That's empowering to know, but honestly, this is all making me a little paranoid.
I understand.
Like now I'm going to be seeing red flags everywhere.
I get it. It can be unsettling to realize that these personality types exist and that we might encounter them.
Yeah.
But the goal isn't to make you fearful.
Right.
It's to empower you with knowledge and awareness.
So it's about like being informed and taking precautions without letting it take over your life.
Exactly. And remember, the vast majority of people are not psychopaths or sociopaths. These
Right.
are relatively rare conditions.
Of course.
But understanding the spectrum of human behavior, including the darker side, can help us navigate the complexities of relationships and protect ourselves.
For sure. Well, I think on that note, it's time to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about a different facet of this whole thing, the legal system.
Right.
So how do psychopaths and sociopaths fare when they actually break the law?
Yeah.
Is there a difference in like the types of crimes they commit?
That's a great question, and one that the ebook actually goes into in some detail.
Okay, this is getting juicy. Tell me more. Okay, so tell me more about the types of crimes.
So the ebook talks about how psychopaths, with like their calculated nature and their lack of empathy,
Right.
they're often drawn to what are called instrumental crimes.
Instrumental crimes. What does that even mean?
So basically it means the crime is a means to an end.
Okay.
Like they have a specific goal in mind,
Okay.
whether it's financial gain or revenge, or even just like the thrill of the act itself.
Okay.
And they plan and execute these crimes with like a chilling level of detachment
Oh, wow.
and precision.
So they're like the masterminds you see in the movies.
Exactly.
Like plotting every little detail and leaving no trace behind.
Exactly. Think like elaborate financial scams,
Okay.
white-collar crimes,
Uh-huh.
even serial killers who like carefully select and stalk their victims.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Okay, so what about sociopaths?
Sociopaths, on the other hand, are more prone to like impulsive, reactive crimes.
Okay.
They might act in the heat of the moment,
Yeah.
fueled by anger, frustration, a perceived threat,
Okay.
and their crimes are often less planned, more chaotic.
Right.
Driven by their immediate emotions rather than like a calculated strategy.
It's more like crimes of passion.
Exactly. Think like bar fights,
Oh, shit.
road rage incidents,
Uh-huh.
property crimes that are committed kind of on a whim.
So like assault or domestic violence as opposed to like a meticulously planned bank heist.
Right. And the ebook actually highlights that, while both psychopaths and sociopaths can be violent,
Right.
their motivations and patterns of violence tend to differ.
Oh, interesting.
So psychopaths might use violence as a tool to achieve a specific goal,
Uh-huh.
while sociopaths are more likely to lash out in an uncontrolled, emotionally charged way.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like this is all sounding like an episode of Law and Order now.
Right.
But it makes you wonder, how does the legal system actually deal with these different personality types?
Yeah.
Like, is it even possible to rehabilitate someone who lacks empathy or remorse?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's something that's plagued the criminal justice system for decades.
Yeah.
The ebook does touch on this, some of the ethical and practical dilemmas involved in treating and sentencing individuals with antisocial personality disorder.
Right.
And honestly, there are no easy answers.
So is there like no magic bullet, no therapy that can just suddenly make someone develop a conscience?
Unfortunately, no.
Gosh,
Traditional therapy methods, that focus on things like empathy, guilt, remorse, they often prove ineffective with psychopaths.
Okay.
Because those are the very emotions that they struggle to comprehend or experience.
Right.
And while some therapies have shown, modest success in reducing recidivism rates among sociopaths,
Yeah.
the results are often inconsistent.
So what does that mean for the legal system? Are these people just like doomed to a life of crime?
Well, the ebook makes this important point that, we shouldn't give up on rehabilitation altogether.
Okay.
While it might be very challenging, there are alternative approaches
Okay.
that focus on managing behavior, teaching coping mechanisms
Uh-huh.
that can potentially reduce the risk of reoffending.
So it's more about harm reduction than like a complete transformation.
Exactly. And the ebook also stresses the need for a more individualized approach to sentencing.
Okay.
Taking into account the specific circumstances of the crime,
Yeah.
the individual's risk factors, and the potential for rehabilitation.
Right. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly. And I think it's important to kind of circle back to something we touched on earlier, this idea that antisocial behavior exists on a spectrum.
Yes.
So while we've been focusing on like the extreme ends of that spectrum.
Right. The lions and the house cats.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that not everyone who displays some of these traits has a full-blown personality disorder.
So you're saying we shouldn't jump to conclusions just because someone's kind of manipulative or seems to lack empathy sometimes?
Exactly. We all have moments,
Sure.
where we might act impulsively or lie to protect ourselves
Yeah.
or manipulate a situation to get what we want.
Yeah, but that doesn't make us a psychopath or a sociopath. Of course. The key is to look at the overall pattern of behavior. Right. The severity of those traits and the impact they have on the individual and the people around them. That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the labels and the stereotypes,
Right.
but really it's about understanding human behavior. And, we're all complex.
Exactly. And this whole deep dive has been about gaining a deeper understanding of that complexity.
Yes.
We've explored the brain, the behavior, the relationships.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. The criminal mind, the legal implications
Sure.
of these fascinating and sometimes unsettling personality types.
I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
Me too.
So as we kind of wrap things up here, what's the key takeaway you want to leave everyone with?
I think the biggest takeaway is just that knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
The more we understand about ourselves and others,
Yeah.
including, the darker aspects of human nature,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to navigate, the complexities of life and to create a safer, healthier world for everyone.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of psychopaths and sociopaths.
My pleasure.
I hope everyone found it insightful and engaging, and maybe even a little bit empowering.
Yeah, for sure.
So as always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.